Sure, hi, the world has found you. I'm Hugh Hewitt inside the Beltway on this wonderful, wonderful, wonderful morning. And the reason I'm calling it a wonderful morning is simply because a historic peace deal doesn't often come along. A historic peace deal is not an everyday occurrence. We had one in 1978 between Menachem Begin, Anwar Sadat, and Jimmy Carter. We had one in 1994 between Jordan's King Hussein, Yitzhak Rabin, the Israeli Prime Minister, and Bill Clinton. And we have one now, as of yesterday, between Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, Crown Prince MBZ, Zayed as they call him, MBZ, in the United Arab Emirates, and Donald Trump. And it paves the way for a new Middle East. The headlines all tell the story. You got to go to the headlines. Financial Times of Great Britain. Israel and the United Arab Emirates strike historic peace accord. The Telegraph in London, Israel to normalize relations with UAE in historic deal sealed by Donald Trump. The Washington Post, Trump announces historic peace agreement between Israel and the United Arab Emirates. The Wall Street Journal, Israel, United Arab Emirates pact sealed after months of furtive talks among envoys trusted by their leaders. The New York Times, Israel and United Arab Emirates strike major diplomatic agreement. Times of Israel gave us a little look into the backstory from Mossad overtures to frenetic U.S. diplomacy, how the UAE deal really happened. And of course, sub-headlines, minor stories. Who's upset? The Palestinians. I talked to a senior staffer at the NSC yesterday, off the record, not for attribution. All the right people are upset, this individual told me. I'm going to have the senior NSC staffer on later today. National Security Advisor Robert O'Brien will join me to discuss this historic moment. Let's review what President Trump said in the Oval yesterday, cut number 22, where he talks about what has just been concluded.
Earlier today, very exciting news, very big news all over the world. They're talking about it all over the world. It was amazing. We finalized a historic peace agreement between Israel and the United Arab Emirates. After half a century, Israel and the United Arab Emirates will fully normalize their diplomatic relations. Nobody thought this was something that could happen for a long time. This is the most important diplomatic breakthrough since the Egypt-Israel peace agreement was signed over 40 years ago. We have Ambassador to Israel, David Friedman, here. Thank you, David, for being here. We very much, you would agree that this was a big day for Israel and a big day for the world.
It was a huge day for the world. I will explain why. One more, President Trump. It's not in the Oval. This is when he's at the podium later. Cut number 23.
The deal that was reached today will enable Muslims to have far greater ability to visit many historic sites in Israel and to peacefully pray at the Al-Aqsa Mosque, which is very important to them, which they've wanted to have access to for many, many decades. This is a monumental step to forging ties of cooperation in the Middle East, and I think you're going to have other countries come forward. I can tell you we already do, and they want to make a deal. We could have peace in the Middle East. It would be fantastic. Israel is also suspending settlements in the West Bank, which is a big deal, a bold step toward achieving peace. Israel and the United Arab Emirates have also agreed to immediately expand and accelerate scientific collaboration to develop effective treatments and vaccines to defeat the China virus.
They are the two most advanced states in the region. Israel and the United Arab Emirates is where all the economic development happens. Now, obviously, the keystones of the Arab world are Egypt, which already has a peace treaty with Israel, and Saudi Arabia, which does not yet. But UAE's MBZ is very much a leader now, first among equals in the Middle East, with others to rally around him. And he is widely regarded around the world as being the go-to guy in the Arab world. And of course, Netanyahu has been prime minister of Israel for the longest of any prime minister in Israel's history, which begins in modern history, which begins in 1948. And the reality of this is it means investment and trade and burgeoning goodwill. It also, our friend Dr. Michael Oren, who's on once a week, former Israeli ambassador to the United States, former deputy minister in the Israeli government, has often said after the Trump peace plan came out that either an Arab government had to make peace with Israel or Israel would exercise its sovereignty over Judea and Samaria. And the Arab world didn't want that. They want a final peace agreement to be done between the Palestinian Authority, but the Palestinian Authority has refused for decades to move since the fake peace of Oslo in 1994. And, what's ironic is in 1978, the Nobel Peace Prize was rightly given to Anwar Sadat and Menachem Begin, but they didn't give it to Jimmy Carter, and Jimmy Carter should have received it then. And in 1994, Yitzhak Rabin got the Nobel Peace Prize, and he got it. He should have gotten it that year, but for the deal with Jordan's King Hussein, and Bill Clinton should have gotten it as well. For that was another keystone deal. Instead, they gave it to Yasser Arafat in one of the historic embarrassment of Oslo. This year, the Nobel Prize ought to go to Netanyahu, MBZ, and President Trump. I'm not sure it will, because Oslo is so fundamentally opposed to doing anything that makes sense. But that which gets rewarded gets repeated. And there are stories, it's not verified. Maybe Ambassador O'Brien will give us a hint later, but I doubt he'll declare anything, that the Arab states of Bahrain and Oman are next in line and very close to signing similar deals. As the Middle East turns on a new axis, the U.S.-led entente of nations opposed to Iranian expansion and malign influence in the region, and those nations under the thrall of Iran include Syria and southern Lebanon, at least. And opposing it are the Sunni Arab world, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, the UAE, Jordan, of course, Bahrain. Qatar goes between the two. They don't really know what they're doing. But UAE leads the way. And this could mean so much good news for the world. I'm just wondering, do you understand how much big news this is for the world? 1-800-520-1234. Joe Biden had to compliment Donald Trump last night. This major diplomatic breakthrough step, it's Camp David all over again. It's a huge deal. And by the way, the list of supporting characters, this is a book. This is a book. You've got Mike Pompeo sending Brian Hook in to the middle of this. You've got Robert O'Brien sending Major General Miguel Correa and Captain Mark Vandroff. General Correa is active duty. Captain Vandroff is retired from the Navy. Jared Kushner's key man is Avi Berkowitz. Secretary Mnuchin's into the middle of this. Daniel Friedman, the ambassador, is in the middle of this. And of course, here in Washington, Israeli Ambassador Ron Dermer and United Arab Emirates Ambassador to the United States, Youssef Al-Otaibi, met repeatedly. Indeed, Israel's spy master, Yossi Cohen of Mossad, kept going back and forth to the Emirates. It's amazing that none of this linked. None of this leaked anywhere. The White House is allegedly full of leaks, and this is a huge accomplishment. And it proves that if you stick with it, Jared Kushner's taken so much grief from people. If you stick with it, if you lay down the objective and you stick with it, in 4 years, you can achieve peace. Hats off to MBZ, Netanyahu, and Trump. And if you're not cheering, you don't really care about peace in the Middle East, because this is a big deal. What's your reaction? 1-800-520-1234. That's the rundown on this Friday morning. A great Friday morning for peace in the world, and especially in the Middle East, especially for our friends in Israel and the United Arab Emirates. 1-800-520-1234. Your reaction connects you to the Hugh Hewitt Show.